The app tells you great job when you learn to say the man drinks water. It doesn't have a lesson for the woman is planning to bleed you dry. For 6 months, I practiced in secret. I thought I was building a bridge to her world. Turns out, I was just bugging my own home. And what I heard broke more than just my heart. It broke the entire fantasy. To understand how I ended up listening in on a conversation that would cost me $35,000, I have to go back to Texas, to the quiet house where this whole idea started. Before I was the old fool listening to a language I barely understood, I was Frank from Fort Worth. And I was good at my job. For 40 years, I was a pipeline welder. That's a job that doesn't forgive mistakes. You spend your days staring at 2 pieces of metal, and your entire purpose is to make them one. You learn to see the future in a hairline crack. You learn to feel a weak weld before it fails. My whole life was about spotting the flaw, the imperfection, the thing that looked right on the surface but was poison underneath. And I never missed. Not once. When retirement came, I wasn't worried. I'd done everything right. After the divorce, after the house was sold, I took a hard look at the numbers. My 401k and the sale of the house left me with a nest egg of about $550,000. On top of that, my pension kicked in at $2,200 a month. I wasn't rich, but I was secure. I had built a solid pipe, and it was meant to carry me through the rest of my days without a leak. The problem wasn't the money. The problem was the silence. For 35 years, I had a life. A wife, a home, a rhythm. You wake up, you go to work, you come home. She's there. You talk about nothing. You talk about everything. It's just life. And then one day, it isn't. She found someone younger. And just like that, the house was an echo chamber. Every room felt too big. The silence was louder than any welding torch. I felt discarded, like an old tool left out in the rain to rust. You walk into a room, and you feel like the walls don't even see you. That's a dangerous feeling for a man to have. It makes you desperate for a place where you're seen again. The idea came from a kid at work, just before I punched out for the last time. He'd just gotten back from Thailand. He was showing me pictures on his phone, beaches, temples, all the usual stuff. But then he started talking about the people. He said life was slower there, more respectful. He told me a story about meeting an old man, a farmer, and how everyone in the village treated him like a king. He showed me a picture. The old man sat at the head of a table, and a dozen people were hanging on his every word. And I looked at that picture, and I didn't see a farmer in Thailand. I saw a man who wasn't invisible. My pension alone, that $2,200, would be more than enough to live like a king myself over there. It wasn't an emotional decision. It was logical. It was a solution. I wasn't running away from a life that had ended. I was running toward one that hadn't started yet. Or so I told myself. That picture of the old man in Thailand, it just wouldn't leave my head. It was like a flash burn from a welding arc, seared onto the back of my eyelids. A man who mattered. A man who wasn't invisible. I'd spent my whole life making things last, making them strong. And here I was, feeling like I'd been torn in half and the other part just thrown away. The idea wasn't just an idea anymore. It felt like a blueprint. So I did what I do. I went to work, not with a torch, but with a keyboard. I spent the next 2 weeks glued to my computer. Retire in Thailand. Cost of living, Bangkok. American expats in Asia. I printed out spreadsheets. I ran numbers until the cheap ink in my printer started to fade. And the numbers, they just worked. My pension, $2,200 a month. That was the baseline. In Fort Worth, that was just enough to get by. But in Bangkok, I was looking at modern apartments, high-rise buildings with a pool and a gym for $500 a month. $500. I was paying more than double that for my little rental that just reminded me of the house I'd lost. I mapped it all out. Rent, $500. Utilities and high-speed internet, $100. Food, even eating out most of the time, maybe $600. That left $1,000 a month for everything else. Travel, entertainment, healthcare. It wasn't a fantasy. It was a solid-state financial plan. The numbers were clean. The welds looked strong. I was a man who knew how to read a plan, and this one was telling me I could live better for less, and maybe, just maybe, I could find a place where I wasn't just waiting for the clock to run out. I had doubts, of course. I'm not a fool. You don't spend 40 years looking for hairline cracks without getting suspicious of anything that looks too perfect. I'd read the stories about the scams, the guys who get taken for a ride. but I saw those as stories about other men. Impulsive men. Men who didn't do their homework. I wasn't them. I was Frank from Fort Worth. I was the guy who could tell a bad weld from 100 feet away just by the color of the flame. I told myself that loneliness wasn't making me stupid. It was making me methodical. I was checking every joint, every connection. The retirement visa process looked straightforward, just had to show a certain amount in a Thai bank account. I had that $550,000 sitting there. It was more than enough. I wasn't going there desperate. I was going there prepared. The biggest doubt wasn't about money. It was about starting over. At 62, I sat in my quiet living room, looking at the boxes I never fully unpacked after the divorce. Each one was like a little tombstone for a part of my life. A part of me thought, Frank, you're too old for this. Just stay here. It's safe. But safe was starting to feel a lot like being buried alive. The silence in that house was a poison. It was a slow leak, draining the pressure out of my life until there was nothing left. And when I weighed that feeling against the risk of the unknown, well, the choice got real simple. It was the difference between a pipe that's already rusted through and one you haven't laid yet. One has no future. The other one it might. So I bought the ticket. A one-way flight to Bangkok. The moment I clicked confirm, I felt a jolt. Not of fear, but of relief. It was done. The next month was a blur of selling everything I owned that wouldn't fit in 2 suitcases. My truck, the furniture, the tools I'd spent a lifetime collecting. And you know what? It didn't even hurt. It felt like shedding a skin I'd been trapped in for too long. I'll never forget stepping out of that airport in Bangkok. It was 2 a.m, but the heat hit me like a physical thing. A wall of warm, damp air thick with smells I'd never smelled before, street food, exhaust fumes, flowers, all of it mixed together. It wasn't quiet. It was a symphony of noise. Tuk-tuks buzzing by, people talking and laughing, music coming from somewhere down the street. It wasn't a leak. It wasn't a rustle. It was a roar. And for the first time in years, I wasn't an old tool left out in the rain. I was just a man standing on a new piece of ground, with the whole world happening all around me. I didn't feel invisible. I felt like I had finally arrived. Those first few weeks in Bangkok, they were like the first rush of oxygen when you cut a new vent in a sealed-off pipe. Everything just came roaring back to life. The first thing that hit me was the cost. It wasn't just low, it felt like a misprint. I found a brand new apartment in a high-rise with a rooftop pool that looked out over the whole city. Crystal clear water, palm trees, the works. It cost me $500 a month. I had to ask the agent 3 times to make sure I heard him right. Back in Fort Worth, a closet with a window costs more than that. My monthly budget for food, for eating out every single day, was $600. And I mean eating well. Noodle soups for $1 that would make a 5-star chef weep. Fresh fruit from markets that tasted like they were invented that morning. My whole life had been about structure. Wake up, weld, sleep, repeat. Now, my days were my own. I'd wake up without an alarm clock, just the sun hitting my window. I'd walk down to a little street-side stall where the owner, a woman who couldn't have been more than 5 feet tall, would just smile and hand me a coffee, strong and sweet. She didn't speak a word of English. I didn't speak a word of Thai. But every morning, she'd smile. It was a small thing. But after years of feeling invisible in my own home, a simple smile from a stranger felt like a lifeline. I wasn't just a customer. I was the American man who came for coffee every morning. I had a place. I was seen. My pension, that $20 to $100 that was barely enough to keep my head above water in Texas, it made me a king here. After all my expenses, rent, food, utilities, high-speed internet that was faster than anything I had back home, I still had $1,000 left over. $1,000 of walking around money. For the first time, I didn't have to check the price of anything. If I wanted to take a taxi across the city, I did. If I wanted to buy a new shirt, I bought it. It wasn't about being rich. It was about being free. The constant, low-grade hum of financial anxiety that had been the soundtrack to my life for 40 years, it was just gone. You'd see them, of course. The other guys, old Westerners, usually with a belly hanging over their belt, walking around with a Thai girl young enough to be their granddaughter. And I'd look at them, and I'd feel a little bit of judgment, a little bit of pity. I'd think to myself, that fella's not in love, he's just lonely. He's renting a companion. I saw it as a transaction. A weak weld, bound to fail. I told myself I was different. I wasn't here for that. I was here for the culture, for the respect, for a genuine life. I was so sure I could see the cracks in their relationships, so confident in my ability to spot a flaw. It never once occurred to me that I was looking in the wrong direction, that the biggest, most catastrophic failure wasn't in front of me. It was building up right inside me. I was living in paradise, but loneliness is a funny thing. It can find you anywhere. It doesn't care if you have a rooftop pool. I'd spend my days exploring, eating incredible food, living on a fraction of my pension. But at night, I'd come back to that brand new apartment, and the silence would be waiting for me. It was a different kind of silence than the one in Texas. It was a high-rise silence, surrounded by a million people, which somehow made it feel even louder. I wasn't invisible anymore, not on the street. But inside, where it mattered, I was still just Frank, alone in a room. That's the hairline crack where the rot gets in. I met her on a Tuesday. I'd gone to the bar of a fancy hotel nearby, just for a change of scenery. And she was working there. Her name was Knock. She was 35, with a smile that could melt the chrome off a trailer hitch. Her English was good, not perfect, but good enough. I ordered a beer, and she started talking to me. Not like a bartender making small talk. She asked about me, where I was from, what I did. I told her I was a retired welder. And she didn't just nod and move on. She asked what that was like. She asked about the heat, the danger. I found myself telling her stories I hadn't told anyone in years. Stories about the pipeline, about the 40 years I spent staring at a blue flame. And she listened. Her eyes never left my face. For the first time, I felt like the most interesting man in the world. We started seeing each other. For the next 3 months, it was like the life I'd only dreamed about was actually happening. She was perfect. She was sweet, she was funny, and she was affectionate in a way that I'd almost forgotten was possible. We'd walk through the markets, and she'd hold my hand. She'd laugh at my dumb jokes. She knew I had a pension and some savings, but she never asked for anything. In fact, when I tried to buy her expensive things, she'd refuse. She'd say, "No, Frank, you save your money." She made me feel wanted, not for my wallet, for me, for my stories, for my bad jokes. I'd look at the other old fellas with their young girlfriends, and I'd feel that same pity. But I'd tell myself, that's not me. This is different. This is real. I was so sure. I was a man who could spot a bad weld from a mile away. And this one felt flawless. The first test came about 3 months in. It was subtle. She got a phone call, and when she hung up, she was crying. I'd never seen her cry before. She told me her mother, who lived in a small village up in Iceland, was sick. She needed an operation, an emergency procedure. It wasn't life-threatening, but it was serious, and it was going to cost $1,500. I saw the look on her face. It was a look of complete despair. And in that moment, all my instincts kicked in. The instinct to protect, to provide, to be the man who could fix the problem. $1,500. It was a lot of money, but I had it. It was a drop in the bucket from my savings. I didn't even hesitate. I went to the bank the next morning, pulled out the cash, and gave it to her. The gratitude, it was overwhelming. She cried again, but this time they were tears of relief. She held me and told me I was the kindest man she'd ever met. She said I had saved her mother. And in that moment, I didn't feel like a man who'd just spent $1,500. I felt like a hero. I felt like the man of the house, the provider. It solidified my place. It felt like I'd just laid down the most important weld of my life. The one that joined our 2 families together. It felt strong. It felt right. It was right after that I started noticing the phone calls. She was always on the phone with her family, her mother, and her sister. And she'd be talking for an hour at a time, in Thai, laughing, and sometimes arguing. And I'd just be sitting there on the outside. I'd ask her what it was about, and she'd just smile and say, "Oh, just family stuff." You know. But I didn't know. And I wanted to. I wanted in. I wanted to understand her world, not just live next to it. That's when I got the idea. I downloaded one of those language apps on my phone, Duolingo. I started practicing in secret. 15 minutes here, half an hour there. I dreamed of the day I could just walk up to her mother, in her village, and say something in her own language. I thought it was the most romantic thing I could do. I thought I was building a bridge. I had no idea I was just setting up a listening post in my own home. The second request came a couple of months later. It was the family buffalo. A story about how it was the most important animal they had for the farm, and it had gotten sick and died. They needed a new one before the planting season. This time, the number was $2,500. A little part of my brain, the old welder part, flagged it. It felt convenient. But my heart just pushed it aside. I saw the logic. It was a farm. They needed a buffalo. And I was in a position to help. Hesitating felt like telling her I didn't trust her. It felt like putting a price on our relationship. So I paid. I was dipping into my main savings now, not just the interest. But the affection that followed, the way she looked at me, it made the doubt go away. For a while, then came the roof. The monsoon season was coming. The family home, she said, had a bad leak. They needed to replace the whole roof. The cost was $4,000. This time, the alarm bells were ringing. The numbers were getting bigger. The crises were getting more frequent. I hesitated. I told her it was a lot of money, that I needed to think about it. And for the next 3 days, she was a different person. She was quiet, distant. The smiles were gone. The hand-holding stopped. The silence I had run halfway across the world to escape was back, sitting right next to me on my own couch. And I couldn't stand it. It felt like a part of me was dying. So I gave in. I went to the bank for $1,000. And just like that, the sun came out again. She was my knock again. And I told myself this was it. This was the last time. I had shored up the family, fixed their problems. Now we could just be together. I was so busy rationalizing the situation, so busy reinforcing the weak spots in the story, that I couldn't see the whole structure was rotten from the ground up. My Thai was getting better. 6 months of secret practice. I wasn't fluent, but I could pick up words, phrases. I could get the gist of a conversation if it was slow enough. One night, I went to bed early. I was tired, just feeling a little worn down by it all. Nok thought I was asleep. She was on a video call with her mother and her sister. I was lying in the dark, just listening to the sound of her voice. And then I started to hear words I knew, words I had practiced on my little app. The first one that hit me was *farong start. Foreigner, that's what they called us. I knew that one. But then it was attached to another word, *farong ngo start. I'd learned that one last week. It meant stupid foreigner. My blood went cold. Then I heard another word, ATM. The meaning of that one is the same in any language. My heart started pounding in my chest. I lay there, pretending to be asleep, forcing myself to be perfectly still. The conversation kept going. I was only catching pieces, but they were sharp pieces. I heard the word wedding. I heard my own name. Then Nok's sister asked a question, something about big money. And I heard Nok's reply, clear as a bell. First, the wedding, she said in Thai. After that, he must pay a proper sinsad, a dowry. I'd read about that. A payment from the man to the woman's family. She said, he has a lot of money. It was like every light in the world went out at once. But the final blow, the one that broke everything, came from her mother. The sweet old woman whose life I thought I had saved. She gave Nok an instruction. I understood almost every word. Tell him you cannot own land, she said. So the new house must be in your name. A new house. That was the end game. The big money. I lay in that bed, in the dark, and I could feel the blood draining from my face. It all clicked into place. The charm. The affection that came after every payment. The interest in my stories. It was all a script. It was a business plan. For 40 years, my job was to see the flaw, the crack, the weakness before it broke. And here I was, lying in the middle of the biggest structural failure of my life, and I had never even seen it coming. I wasn't her partner. I wasn't her hero. I was a project, an investment. I was the stupid foreigner, the ATM, and my heart didn't just break. It shattered. The silence in that room was a lie. My eyes were closed. My breathing was slow and even, a perfect picture of a man asleep. But I wasn't asleep. I was wide awake, and I was listening. Nok was on the other side of the room, her face lit up by the phone screen, talking to her mother and sister. The sound was just a murmur at first, the same murmur I'd been hearing for months. But this time was different. This time, words started to climb out of the murmur. Words I knew. The first one that landed was far off. Foreigner. Nothing new there. It's what they call us. But it was the word she attached to it that made the air in my lungs turn to ice. Farong ngo. I had just learned that one a few days ago, clicking through a lesson on adjectives. It means stupid foreigner. She said it with a little laugh. My heart gave a single, hard kick against my ribs. I didn't move a muscle. I just listened. Then I heard her sister's voice through the tinny speaker. She was laughing too. And then came a word that needs no translation. ATM. She called me an ATM. A machine you walk up to, put a card in, and get money out of. A tool. Not a person. A thing. I felt the blood drain from my face, and I prayed the darkness was enough to hide it. I had to keep listening. I had to know how deep the rot went. They were talking faster now. Excited. I heard the word wedding. I heard my own name. Then the sister asked a question. The connection was bad, but I caught the important part. Something about big money. My whole body went rigid. And then I heard Knock's voice, clear as day, laying out the plan. First, the wedding, she said in Thai. After that, he must pay a proper sinsat. The dowry, that word I'd read about on some expat forum. A payment from the man's family to the woman's. A price. She wasn't done. She added, he has a lot of money. That should have been it. That should have been the moment the floor gave out. But there was one more piece. The final blow. It came from her mother. The sweet, old woman whose life I thought I'd saved with $1,500. Her voice came through the phone, firm and clear, giving an instruction. An order. Tell him you cannot own land, she said. The new house must be in your name. A new house. That was it. That was the end game. It wasn't about a buffalo. It wasn't about a roof. It was about a house. My house. In her name. I lay there in the dark, my eyes squeezed shut, but all I could see was the blueprint. It was all there. The initial investment. The carefully managed affection. The escalating crises. It wasn't a relationship. It was a construction project. And I was the site. For 40 years, my entire life was about finding the flaw before the pipe burst, before the pressure found the weak spot. And here I was, the weak spot. I had spent my life building things that last, and I had let them build a fantasy around me that was designed to collapse the moment they got what they wanted. I wasn't a man. I wasn't Frank. I was a wallet. I was a number in a bank account. I was the stupid foreigner, the ATM, and in the silence of my own bedroom, listening to the woman I loved laugh about how she was going to gut me, my heart didn't just break. It turned to dust. So that was it. That was the end of the line. I didn't confront her. There's no point arguing with a rattlesnake about why it bit you. You just get away. The next morning, I came up with a story about a family emergency back home. A lie to escape a bigger lie. I packed one suitcase, left everything else right where it was, and got on the first flight I could find back to the United States. My hands didn't stop shaking until the plane was over the Pacific. I'm in Florida now, living in a small, rented condo. The bank account is $35,000 lighter than it was a year ago. I'm rebuilding, but the experience left a scar. It's a permanent reminder that the most catastrophic failure doesn't come from a flaw in the metal. It comes from a flaw in the plan. And that's why I'm telling you this story. Not for sympathy, but as a warning. Because there's a good chance you're sitting right where I was, looking at a map and thinking a new country is the answer. So here are the lessons I paid 35 grand for. First, your desire to be loved cannot become a liability. That loneliness, that feeling of being discarded that you're running from, that is a vulnerability. And there are people in this world who are experts at spotting it. They'll make you feel wanted, all right. But it's a transaction. They're not seeing you. They're seeing an opportunity. Second, learning the local language is not a romantic gesture. It is a primary tool of self-defense. I started learning Thai because I wanted to build a bridge to her heart. Turns out, I was just building an early warning system for myself. That little app on my phone is the only reason I'm not completely broke today in a house that I paid for but could never own. Finally, the most expensive thing you can bring to a new country is not your wallet. It's your own naivete. It's the belief that you're the exception, that you're too smart to fall for the old tricks. I spent 40 years of my life spotting hairline cracks and steel under immense pressure. I was an expert in finding a flaw, and I missed the biggest one of all because it was right inside me. I bought a one-way ticket to paradise and almost paid for it with my entire future. The final bill was $35,000 and a hard lesson. If you feel like an outsider in your own home, you are. If you're thinking about starting a new life overseas, don't let your heart write checks your brain can't cash. Before you calculate the cost of living, calculate the cost of ignorance. Learn the language, not as a hobby, but as your armor. If you want to hear the unvarnished truth about life abroad that you won't see in the travel vlogs, subscribe to this channel. Because the biggest danger isn't what you see, it's what you can't understand.